Okay, Sarah, thanks so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it. How's it going with Ailey's Grace?
It's good. We are done. We finished the last mix of the last episode was a week ago.
Oh my God.
It's finally finished, which is an amazing feeling.
So how long is the journey, like half your life? How much of the time have you been sort of working away at this?
So since I was 18, and I'm 38 now. So
wow.
Yeah, it took 20 years between imagining it as a film and finishing it as a miniseries.
Wow. Are you going to be able to stop thinking about it, or is it always
I hope so.
Yeah.
I really hope so. I definitely feel like it's been something hanging over me for all these years that I had to finish, and now that it's done, the world feels wide open.
Wow.
Yeah.
Within that span, though, do you feel like it came along at the right point in your evolution as an artist, as a writer?
I think to a certain extent, because I feel like, you know, at 18 I was very much identifying with young Grace, and by the time we finally made it, I was really identifying with older Grace. So to have actually been the ages from 18 to 38 is pretty much, I mean, she goes from 16 to 42 or 43. So I really got to kind of like live that span of life while living with that book and imagining it. So I think that was actually useful in terms of when I finally was completing the writing. It had really changed from what I would have written when I was 18.
Wow. What do you think about what's going on with TV right now? I mean, there's so much good stuff. Are you involved? Do you pay attention?
I think it's thrilling. I mean, I feel a little bit lost in how much good television there is. It just feels like it's an endless amount of stuff to catch up on. And, you know, in the days where it was only an independent film where interesting stuff was happening,
right,
it was a lot easier to feel like you hadn't missed stuff if you really worked at it. And now I feel like you just will never catch up with how much amazing content there is and how many amazing creations there are out there. But that's thrilling. I mean, and I also think there's an autonomy that filmmakers are getting when they work with places like Netflix or HBO that didn't used to exist. For filmmakers working with a certain kind of budget, I think that was very much like an auteur-driven, you know, films in, you know, maybe in the 90s, in the golden days of independent film, you would see filmmakers have that kind of freedom with small budgets. And now I feel like a lot of the people at these places are giving filmmakers that kind of autonomy, but with a much bigger scope with which to sort of make their vision happen, which is really exciting.
So do you make your choices based on stuff that speaks to you as an artist, politically, what you hear from other people?
For me, it's a lot of word of mouth.
Yeah.
Like, I would say I choose almost everything I watch based on what other people have seen first. Probably I'm always behind because I have little kids, so
yeah.
I'm always catching up.
Yeah.
So it's almost always, I think what people, but I think again, there are much more socially relevant things being made on television now than we were seeing for a long time in film, and that's really exciting.
And what about the news? I mean, you're a political person. Are you hanging every day on CNN and CBC and trying to figure out what's going on in the world?
I feel like, for better or for worse, my main source of news now is Twitter. Just because I feel like, you know, I'm really careful about who I follow, and it becomes this kind of curated news source of like The Guardian or the New York Times or, you know, the CBC or CNN. Like it sort of like is pointing me at what I'm most interested in. It's such a confusing time. I feel kind of lost, and like we're living in such a kind of chaotic, unpredictable time. So again, I just feel like you're always kind of catching up.
Does the political climate affect what you want to make as art? Like, has it made you double down on certain things? Talk about
100%. So I feel like, actually Cameron Bailey made a speech at the Toronto Film Critics Awards last year or this year, where he just sort of issued this challenge to everybody in the audience who was able to raise money for films. So like, this Moonlight was made for $6 million. Like, I challenge anyone who can raise that money. Like, what are you making a film about? Like, in these times, what are you making a film about? And you know, it had been a feeling that had been encroaching on me for a long time, but it helped clarify it for me that like, these aren't frivolous times, and if you have political things to say or to make, this isn't the time to hold back. It's not the time to be polite. It's not the time to choose to make the thing that's best for your career. And sort of in conjunction with that, I finally felt like I found, you know, 2 projects, which I'm sort of starting on now. They're very, very early stages, which actually did have either a political subtext or a political context or something overtly political to say. So for me, it was like, I've always felt like I had a very divided life, that there was, you know, my political self, and then there was my filmmaking self. And I never was able to find a way to bring those things together. Even though there are lots of political filmmakers I admire greatly, I wasn't able to find a way to do that without being really sort of lectury or preachy or obnoxious. And I didn't know how to do that elegantly. And so sort of in a nice sort of coincidence, I just feel like at this moment, those things have really come together for me. I feel like Alias Grace is like a little bit of part of that, like a little bit of a segue into that, like that it is talking about a lot about women and a lot about women's history and immigration and, you know, taking on immigration now by looking at where we've all come from and how we all got here. So I feel like there is a political context to Alias Grace, but then I think moving forward, my projects will be much more clearly political in various ways, and also with issues of representation. I think I've become like extremely important to me. I feel like I've become a lot less ignorant over the last few years. So I just feel like I'm hoping like my work will reflect that education that I feel I'm having right now.
In terms of who you put on screen or who your crews are, or
both?
Both, yeah.
Both, yeah.
Can you talk about what the next projects are, or are they?
I feel like they're really, really early. So one is a television series that's based on an environment I was in for a while, and the other is I optioned The Best Kind of People, the novel by Zoe Whittall, which deals with a sexual assault case.
Wow.
Which is again something I just feel like there's not enough female voices heard on this subject, and the way these things play out within a community or a family or in the media. Yeah,
I mean, you know, especially the sexual assault stuff is very much on everybody's minds right this very moment.
Yeah.
I think that the very act of your staying in Canada could almost be construed as a political statement. I mean, I know you've probably been asked this question before, but do you have a different perspective now on why you stayed? Was there something particular about being in Canada itself that made you want to stay?
I think in terms of like being an actor and being in film, I think I was aware really early on that there were a lot of things that people want that are taken for granted that I did not want. And I think that at various stages I questioned that, or I was questioned by other people if that was, you know, some kind of act. But I think that deep down, I don't think I've ever really wanted a lot of attention from people I don't know. I think that's always been a scary thing for me. And maybe because I had a lot of it as a young age, at a young age, I knew what the problems with that were. That never seemed romantic to me. So at the time when The Sweet Hereafter happened, when like my acting career really took off, you know, as an adult, I had just come off of like years of just being a political activist. Like I'd given up acting. I wasn't interested in it. It felt like not a serious thing to do with your life. The idea of political filmmaking hadn't occurred to me. The idea of like the kinds of films Adam was making hadn't occurred to me. So for me, it was like, all of a sudden this career took off that I hadn't really asked for. Like I was really interested in working with Adam and doing The Sweet Hereafter, but it felt like a one-off. So suddenly then I was on this path that had a certain story attached to it, and it wasn't a story I wanted to live out. So I think that a lack of ambition has been really grounding for me and has made it easy for me to not do things that were tempting on the surface. I also had a certain sense of myself that like I'd had enough upheaval in my childhood and enough you know, enough erratic circumstances in my background that I knew that, you know, a life of, you know, an actor in Hollywood getting a ton of attention, that I would not stay grounded through that. I would not retain my sense of self. And I've seen some people do that, and I've seen some people do it well. I knew I wouldn't be one of them, and I knew that I'd be weirdly turning my back on the life I wanted, whatever that was going to be, by having a life that other people wanted. I just think I would have lost myself completely and not had a happy life.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because you had said, you know, I think a lack of ambition, but I was going to question that lack of. I don't think it's a lack of ambition. I think it's just a different ambition. It's an ambition that not everybody, there's a conventional ambition, and then there's the thing you really want.
I think there's an assumption in our society that everyone secretly wants to be famous, and if they don't want to be famous, they're lying. And certainly among my friends in high school, that was the deal. Like you know, I definitely grew up with a group of people who really wanted to be like in the media or in film, and so I was like a big bullshit artist, because obviously that's what I wanted. Like, but it took a long time to go, like, actually, like, there are some people, it's like their worst nightmare to have that kind of attention. And I think I do have ambition, but it's like very much in the moment. So I'll be very ambitious for a project I start. I'll be very ambitious for that thing to go well. But it's not there's no overall life plan, there's no goal. There's like a sense of wanting to do things that matter, to be, you know, have time and presence for relationships, but there's not some sense of like, here's where I want to be in 10 years in my career.
Now it's time for my superhero movie.
Yeah, and also because I think those plans always go badly anyway. You know, I've seen people with those plans and they don't go the way they're supposed to. So I think it's just like you're really lucky if you get to do work you love, and it takes different forms.
So it wasn't so much a matter of acting not being enough for you, like realizing that that's not enough. It's that it was always a part of wanting different challenges.
I think so, and I think the first thing I ever wanted to do was be a writer. Like when I was in grade 2, I had an amazing grade 2 teacher who just let me write all day, every day. That's all I did, and let me read them to the class. And that was very clear for me from a very early age that what I wanted to do is write. So I don't think I thought about when I was a teenager in acting that you could write in film. I thought that was separate, and then when I sort of happened upon that discovery, like actually films can be meaningful, films can have enormous impact. It's a way of speaking and a way of starting a conversation and creating a dialogue about something important to you. That was an amazing moment to realize, like, actually I don't have to like leave the world I grew up in to be what I wanted to be or to write.
So was there a before and after moment in your evolution, not necessarily in your career, but within yourself, within your career, if you know what I mean? Was there do you think there's a before and after, Sarah?
I think that when I was supposed to do Almost Famous, I think dropping out of that movie was pivotal, because I remember dropping out of that film and, you know, basically throwing a hand grenade into the middle of my career, into all the people associated with my career, and going, okay, well, I don't want to do that role, which is the thing I'm supposed to want to do. So what am I doing? And I got really depressed. And then I remember I went to see The Thin Red Line, the Terrence Malick movie. And I remember I'd been depressed for months, and I remember I left that theater not depressed anymore. Like it lifted and carried me into this very like light place full of a kind of faith in human beings and in humans' ability to make things that matter to people. And I just thought, like, okay, I want to do that, but I want to like make something. And then I really shortly after made my very first short film, and realized, okay, this is what I want to do. And I think then the idea of film changed for me, about how relevant it was and how important or unimportant it was, and also just a sense of purpose and that feeling of collaboration that you don't get as an actor in the same way. Like I always felt as an actor, you know, you do the blocking, and then everybody starts talking. They send you away to your trailer to get like into your clothes, while everybody talks about the most interesting part of the process, like how are we going to do it? Where are we going to put the camera? How's it going to cut together? And I was like, I'm getting sent away from the party, like just when the party starts. And so realizing that intense collaboration was full of so much joy.
Wow. You mentioned Malick in that film. Was there a person who really mattered to you, or maybe even especially a Canadian person who mattered to you, who you thought, that gives me hope, or that gives me reason to stay or keep doing this?
I mean, there's been a lot of people over the years in like various capacities. I mean, certainly Adam McGoyan and David Cronenberg really, you know, set the tone for a lot of people. Gord Downey, I mean, I like musicians too who have stayed and have decided like their mission is to be really successful Canadian musicians, not needing to be given tons of affirmation by everybody else in the world.
Right.
But it's funny, like I think that in my like early 20s or my teens, I would have talked about staying in Canada as a political decision. And there is, in part, that's, you know, I think it's really moving with John Smith, like people who have made things that are very relevant to this country and have continued to do that, and to think that's a worthy thing to do with your time as opposed to like needing to go somewhere else. There is that. But then I'm forced to admit as I get older also, like it's a completely selfish decision as well. I like being here. I love living in Toronto. I love living in Canada. I have a sensibility that I think fits here and that it fits with me. And so, like, I didn't want to leave. Like, I wanted to stay here, and then I felt like that was a legitimate decision to make. And now I notice a lot of actors doing that. A lot of people would have in the past expected to move to LA, that now it doesn't feel like as bold or revolutionary a decision to stay in Canada. I think when I made that decision, like, it was definitely questioned a lot. But it does feel now like that's not like a something you have to convince people of that you want to live somewhere else.
Right. You do have a unique perspective, though, because you've been going in and out of the States your whole life. Have you noticed that there was one perception of Canada when you were younger, and has that changed now?
I felt like pre-Harper, I always got the feeling of us being this utopian, almost socialist place. And like, Canada was talked a lot about. I felt like during the Harper years, there was this like stony silence. It was just like we didn't exist. like no one had any impression of us. Like no one had anything to say. Like it was like totally interesting. Like we just, no one had any kind of stereotype in their head at all. And now maybe that's come back a bit. Like now things have like gone back into their.
I feel like with Justin and immigration, and I feel like we may be cool again. Legal marijuana.
I definitely think that there's no way for us to not seem cool right now compared to what's going on in the States. But then I worry that then that allows us to paint far too rosy a picture of what things are actually like here in terms of everything from immigration to everything else. Like I don't think we're doing nearly as much as we're painting a picture of us doing. But I think having the States next to us now allows us to go back into our there's that great term angel complex that I was listening to on the Color Code podcast.
I don't know what the angel complex is.
Oh, so the angel complex is like how Canadians just think like we're so amazing on issues of race and immigration because we're better than Americans. So it allows us to talk about ourselves in this very saintly way and feel great about ourselves when in fact we've got ages to go before things are okay. Exactly.
Is there a misconception about you out there?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to know because I could think something's a misconception that might actually be true. I think that's what's confusing is I would say that I'm not nearly as serious and sad as I seem. I think I seem extremely sad and serious, which I don't think is what I'm like. But then you think, well, maybe I am. I don't know. Maybe I am really sad and serious, and my standards are off or my perspective is off. But I don't know. I feel like. Let me think. Is there any misconceptions about me? I think that's what I would say would be like the main thing that I notice that I'm always surprised by is how I come across extremely serious. And I think there would be people in my life that see that side of me, but generally that isn't the way I feel or am in the world.
Right, right. And what advice would you have for someone who's just starting out?
Like as a filmmaker?
Yeah, or as an actor, as a filmmaker, as a screenwriter, and any one of the...
I think you have to be careful of doing things just for the sake of opening doors. I think there's a lot of talk when you first start out about do this because it'll open a lot of doors. But I think if it's something you don't actually feel passionate about, now there's a financial incentive too, which I think people also have to make a living. So I don't begrudge anybody opening a door they don't really believe in because they have to make a living. That's fine. But I think when you get into the habit of opening doors for the sake of it, those are followed by other doors that you're also opening just for the sake of opening doors, and it's very, very easy. And the process of losing the thread of what you wanted to do in the first place and why you wanted to do it is very easy to lose that thread. It happens a lot quicker than you think it's gonna happen. So, and I think that the getting on the train of money, getting on the train of fame, is extremely hard to get off of it. And I think I've had glimmers of that in my career where I've been like, well, why don't I just do this one thing? And then that thing leads to another thing. And it's a big wrenching process to get yourself back to, I don't need that. I want to do something I believe in and care about. It's really, really hard. Which isn't to say you can't have a really great life, just by making money but probably if you go into the arts, that isn't what you set out to do in the first place. And I think that you may look back in years to come thinking you made the decision for the wrong reason. So I would say doing things that you believe in is really important, not trying to open too many doors for the sake of it. And I think as much as possible, writing things and developing things on spec is a really good idea. Not involving people too early in the process, especially with those first few projects where you're really expressing something that's coming very, very deep within you.
Was there a particular pivot that you made away from something towards something?
I feel like I've made a few pivots.
Did you see yourself going in the wrong direction and yank yourself back?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I had a concussion a year and a half ago, and certainly having many months in bed in the dark to think was not such a bad thing. And it really reminded me of like why I wanted to start doing this and how was I going to feel in 20 years and what do I want to look back and say I've done. And I think I made the segue again to kind of focusing much more on my own work than I had been, and making sure that what I was doing had something to say, that it wasn't just another movie. I mean, we're drowning in content right now. Like a lot of people can make a well-crafted, good TV show or film. So I think if you're going to add to noise, especially in this political climate, like you want it to have something to say that you actually think is worth talking about.
Oh, I can't wait to see what you do next.
Oh, thanks.
Thank
What
you
if they're
so
really
much.
bad now? What if everything's
You're
really,
allowed to do
really
that
crappy?
too.
Yeah.
Everybody's allowed. You can't do anything if you're not risking failure, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for
Thank
coming in to
you.
talk to
Thank
us
you
about
very
it.
much.
It's so exciting to see it again now.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
haven't seen it in a long time. I don't think I ever will again. So
Well,
done.
it's going to be on
But
right
thank you.
after this. You
Okay,
can
then
watch it.
I'll stay tuned.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank
Sarah.
you. Thank you so much.